Good evening, friends. I'm Kevin Butler. I'm the Law Director for the City of Lakewood, and I want to welcome you to our now semi-annual Landlord Information Seminar. Thanks for being here. On behalf of the Mayor Summers, who's here, I just want to say to you, we appreciate you being here. We appreciate what a big business being a landlord in Lakewood is, and how important it is to our community. We do want to get started so that we can respect your time. Our effort tonight is going to be to present all this material to you and have you out of here by 8:30, unless you wish to stick around afterward for a general Q&A, in which case we'll go to 9. Those of you who want to stay after 8:30, remain in your seats, please. Those of you who want to go at 8:30, we'll excuse you. And I would just ask you to leave quietly, and then we can take questions from those who remain. From your seats, though. We're not going to have a one-on-one with the folks up in the front of the room, all right? We hope that all of you can benefit from the Q&A at the end of the seminar. During the seminar itself, unless any of our speakers have to leave during the seminar, we'd ask you to withhold your questions until the end so that we can get through all the presentations. We've got a great lineup tonight, but it's packed. Let me start by just keeping you updated on a few of the things that are going on here that impact you. All of these come from our Division of Building and Housing, which I know you're very familiar with. The first item is that individual condo units now that are going to be rented out and not lived in by the owner of the condo unit itself are now going to be subject to the housing license requirement, as would be single and two-family homes, and those rental units that are, higher than that, so three-family and up. So now individual condo units, as of this year, are going to be required to, those owners are going to be required to pull housing licenses as everyone else would. If you live in that unit and you're renting out a bedroom, that's not required. But for those units that are not going to be lived in by the owner, it is required. All housing license applications are now going to be due at the same time. We had previously divided smaller rental properties from larger and divided them by half-year increments. That's not going to be the case anymore. All the housing licenses are going to be now due at the same time, and we're not going to be asking you to turn in your license applications until around October 1. They're all due on November 1. So for those of you who are planning on renewing in June, you get a few-month reprieve on that. And then finally, brought to my attention that the contractor certification or application form downstairs in Housing and Building is now going to have a checkbox, and we're going to require that those contractors performing certain work are EPA lead-safe certified. That's a program that's been in place since 2010. I'm sure you may be familiar with it. Has a lot to do with the effects of lead paint on children, primarily in Lakewood, which is a problem, and so we're going to be enforcing that at the local level at this point by requiring that contractors who register are EPA lead-safe certified. All right. There's information on the table outside on that particular requirement. And it's for those contractors that are going to be disturbing, I think it's something like 6 square feet of paint, at least 6 square feet of paint. They have to be lead-safe certified. Those should include property managers for those of you who employ property managers. All right, our first presentation is going to be from Bob Myers and Jennifer Lamont. They are a father-daughter duo at Robert Myers Insurance. And we wanted them to offer some best practices from that industry, the insurance industry, on products that landlords in Lakewood may wish to obtain. So I guess, Mr. Myers, I'm going to turn it over to you first. Mr. Myers has been in this business for somewhere between 35 and 40 years, the last 25 of which he's been in sales. So he's got a lot of information and insight to offer. Mr. Myers, you want to join me here? Thanks.
Good evening. As Kevin said, I'm Bob Myers. We're located in the I&A building, which is where Panera is, only we're on the 5th floor. But it's convenient because everyone likes to come for coffee, so we can come in and have coffee, and we don't even have to go up to our office. But basically what I wanted to do was inform, you probably already know, you've been in landlords, you've probably dealt with insurance companies, but what insurance companies look for when they're going to underwrite a rental property. Primarily what they're looking for is the age and condition of the roof. They prefer it to be under 25 years of age. The age and the condition of all heating units, or maybe 2 or 3 heating units in the building. So again, they're looking for heating units that have been well maintained and are under 25 years of age. And then wiring. They want to make sure that there's a circuit breaker box, not a federal, but a circuit breaker box, recently new GE or some other model. And then possibly all new wiring, or at least any renovation areas have had new Romex or subsequent type wiring that's been updated from the knob and tube. Another point that they look for are handrails on all the steps. If you have 2 or more steps, they like to have handrails to prevent the liability problem. And then also pavements. They want to make sure that the driveway's in good condition, that there's no slip or fall hazards, so that, again, to eliminate the liability problems in the house. And they also like to make sure that you as landlords have tenants that will have a lease of at least a year in longevity, and no pets that are going to be attacking neighbors or upstairs or downstairs tenants. They have a list of dogs that they like to have the breeds checked to make sure that they complement the insurance company's requirements. I used to be, when I first started in loss control work with the insurance companies, and we'd go out and we'd inspect commercial buildings, make sure that they were up to code, make sure that the wiring was good, et cetera, et cetera. So I am familiar with what to look for in a building, and I'd like to say that any time if you're doing work or you're going to put a bid on a house, and you'd like a little more feedback or a little more information, I'd be glad, give me a call, I'd be glad to come out and look at it and give you my opinion for what it might be worth. But dealing with the insurance company, sometimes I feel like I'm a hockey player. You know, I'm the goalie. They shoot I shoot the puck at them, and then they turn around and say, and they shoot it back at me, and I have to let it go through. So that's what we deal with in the insurance industry. Again, most of them want a lease simply because that makes it a more stable operation, and they can count on the tenants taking care of the property that they're renting. Also, if you're going to be living in part of the unit, make sure that when you move out and rent the other part of the home, that you turn your policy from a homeowner into a landlord type policy, because a homeowner policy, once you move out, is not going to give you the same coverage, nor the house the same coverage. So you want to make sure that you do that. And again, if you have questions along those lines, we represent 10 major carriers, and most of them will write ACV, that's actual cash value that we use, also replacement costs. So we have a good wide market. If we can't write it in those, then we have other accesses that we can go to and probably get the business taken care of. But anytime you do have questions, feel free to give us a call. We're not going to bring you in and capture you and say, oh, you got to sign on the dotted line. No, we don't work that way. So we're pretty easy to get along with, and we like to make sure that you're getting your questions answered. Whether you buy from us or not, that's not the point. You want to be a knowledgeable consumer, and anything that we can help you to get to that point, we'll be glad to do, and we'll share whatever we have, whatever information we get. We're always getting updated information from the underwriters, so we'll know what to keep you posted on. So as things move forward with the insurance companies, we'll try to keep you in that same bailiwick. I'd like to turn it over to my daughter, Jennifer, and she's been with the company now for 15 years, and if you call and she's there, she's licensed, she can do the same thing that I can do, so go.
Hi, welcome everybody to tonight's presentation. In your pamphlet, we put, as my father said, we work with 10 preferred companies, and then we have brokers that we work with for hard-to-place insurance. And in your folder, what I did is I put a couple pieces of information about being a landlord and the type of insurance and the coverages that are available to you through Foremost. Foremost is a company we use a lot for 1 to 4 families. Then there's also a pamphlet in there of actual cash value for vacant homes. And you might want to look at that while you're renovating a property. That insurance is completely different from when you turn it over to a landlord property. There's also a little bit of information for those of you who don't know my father or me in Lakewood. There's a little bit of information about Robert Myers Insurance. And then there's a referral card that you can also use for yourself if you've never obtained a quote with us in our agency. Or just come in for coffee and we'll take you through the process and give you the information that you need. Okay? Thank you.
Jennifer,
Yes.
what are some of the names that carriers apply to landlord-type policies once landlords transition from a homeowner's policy into a landlord policy? Are you able to shed some light on that?
I'm not sure I know what you.
Well, Bob,
Well, we have Liberty Mutual.
Oh, the different
I'm not talking about
companies?
I'm not talking about the carriers. I'm talking about the actual policy products
different
themselves. What are
coverage?
Yeah, what are the coverages
Okay.
called when you transition from a homeowner's policy to a landlord's policy?
So you still have your dwelling coverage, which if you have a loan, the bank's going to want to see replacement cost on that, which could, the dwelling amount could be much higher than if you wrote it actual cash value, which could be on the very low side for landlords that don't carry a loan. Then there's other structures, say for a garage, sheds. Can you think of anything else of that sort? And then there's loss of use. So let's say you have a loss where your tenants need to be out of the dwelling. This would give you compensation for the rent while you're renovating and taking care of the damage. Liability coverage is very important for anything that might happen on your property as far as somebody getting injured or take it to a lawsuit extreme. And so we write standard out of our office, $300,000, but underwriters specifically tell us that as much as you can afford, you should carry at this point, just because of the lawsuits. Am I missing anything for coverage?
I think
Medical?
One of the most important items to protect yourself would be
Bob, go ahead and speak into the mic.
making sure that your tenants carry tenants insurance. Because if you don't have that, and something happens, it's going to come back on you.
Right.
And you want to try to protect yourself and the owners of that property as best you can. I had a client that called me, and he didn't believe in tenants, making his tenants get insurance. But he called me right after the 4th of July, and he said, "Oh my God, Bob, I don't know what to do." I said, "What happened? What happened?" He said, "One of my tenants had a grill, a barbecue grill, on the 2nd story open porch, and it started a fire. Caught the ceiling on fire, and it spread right through. You know, the attics are all open in those houses, went right through the attic." His tenant did not have insurance. Well, his insurance picked up the damages, but he was charged a claim.
A sure claim or
You
a
know,
surcharge for
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
right?
surcharge, and you don't want to get into that position. So I'd say recommend always get your tenants to have tenant insurance.
And how you do that and how you're able to keep track of it, it doesn't have to be our agency, it can be any agency, but I would make sure that they list you as additional insured, because you have a financial interest in that property, and I would either have them pay in full. However, if you're listed as additional insured, you would get a notice of cancellation if they haven't paid their premium, so you kind of know. But really, in the scheme of things, you know, depending on how many properties you have, you might not want to keep up with cancellation notices. I would have them just pay in full and have them carry $300,000 in liability so that you're not being charged if something happens and needing that whole amount for a claim.
Jennifer, would you say that lease provisions requiring tenants to carry what we'll call colloquially tenants insurance ought to be specific as to liability coverage?
Yeah, you know, we see some that give the owners of the property Like, I don't know who they go through, but there's certain ones that will carry 100,000. But really, in the scheme of things, you should carry 300,000, just because of how much it costs. If you have a total loss, if you have a partial loss, how much that would cost to restore it to as is before the fire or before any damage is done to your home. And grills on porches, you probably can go up and down streets and see people with grills. So I highly recommend that you think about having your tenants carry their own insurance and provide that to you. Any other questions?
Thanks. Can you stick around until 8:30? Is that all right? Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that presentation. So you're going to find a good deal of information in those folders. Of course, and you probably have heard me say this a million times, when we ask experts in the field to come up and talk about their various products, we're not asking them to advertise their own services, and they know that. However, they can be a good resource for you in the future, and you're welcome to call them. But the city makes no recommendation or referrals with respect to private insurance agents or carriers. I suppose that goes without saying, but you ought to know that. Alex Harnos is a city planner down in the Department of Planning, and he's going to present to you the results of a survey that began last year, and we talked about at the September seminar, if you were here, and that is our latest incarnation of the citywide exterior housing survey. Alex.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, everyone, for your time tonight. So, again, we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the Housing Forward survey. This is the third incarnation of this survey. Housing Forward is a strategy that planning, building, the mayor's office developed in 2012, recognizing that housing really is the economic engine of Lakewood, and preparing our housing stock for its second century in most cases. The average house in Lakewood was built in 1919, so most of those houses will be turning 100. Either they already have or they will very soon. And so preparing that housing for its second century is really one of the keys to Housing Forward. Housing Forward consists of three elements. One is this event here tonight, landlord training. We know that about 55% of our residential units are rented in Lakewood, and so communicating to landlords is a huge part of our strategy. The second part that I'll spend most of my time up here tonight on is on proactive code enforcement, essentially going on offense, identifying code issues not by complaint, but by going out and observing. And then the third is resource connections, helping homeowners and helping landlords address issues that are uncovered in Step 2. So what does Step 2 consist of? This was our survey in 2018. Every 3 years, more or less, so in 2012, in 2016, and again last October, we go out and stand in front of 13,000 individual structures. That's every 1, 2, and 3 family home in the city of Lakewood. So if you own a building that's 4 units or above, you're not included in this data set. We look at larger buildings in different ways. But when we're doing a comprehensive survey like this, it's pretty easy to compare 1, 2, and 3 family homes. They're all more or less the same structure with the same things going on. So we send teams of 2 out to walk the streets, stand in front of these homes, and assess them on a grading scale essentially of 1 to 4. Those 2-person teams always consist of 1 person from the building department, a building inspector or a property maintenance inspector, and another employee of the city. They have to come to consensus on that rating, and they record that and feed it back into my department. So what do those ratings mean? A 1 means that no visible code violations on the exterior of the house. A 2 is essentially something that a normal person could spend a weekend and 1 or 2 trips to Home Depot and take care of. Some painting, steps out of whack, a couple missing shingles, something like that. A 3 is something you would more than likely hire a contractor for. We were placing a value on a 3 of between $1,000 and $25,000. So this could be something like Mr. Myers was talking about, a severely cracked driveway that presents a tripping hazard, or steps with no handrails. Something that's potentially a safety issue, but also would take some doing to repair. And then a 4 is essentially a 3, but with multiple things going on. So a very worn roof, and it needs paint on all 4 sides. What you'll see in the results is that there are very few of these, and that's a good thing, because when you see a 4, you notice it. You know that it's on your street, and it's a building that's known to us and is probably known to you as well. Additionally, in 2018, we had all the surveyors make notes, just very simple notes on each home if they did note a violation. This helps us with the follow-up, and it helps us to provide you additional information in these next steps. So if someone said, this is a 2 because the chimney needs tuck pointing, you might get, we might have a note returned to us with a 2C for that particular address. Or this is a 3 because there's a broken window and the porch steps are crooked, would be a 3 with a P and a W, for example. We've never recorded this information before. It always just came back as the rating numbers. And we think that this will help us to be more focused and will help us to provide you and the building inspectors better information over the next couple of months. So just visually, this house is a 1. There are no visible building code violations. This house is a 2. Maybe you can spot why it's a 2. There's a little bit of peeling paint on some of the 3rd floor trim. Again, something that a normal person could repair in a weekend. This is not a house that causes us grave concern. We're not sending a building inspector out there immediately, but we note it. If you couldn't see it, zooming in. This house is a 3. So it needs a coat of paint. There are a few issues with the porch stairs. The driveway is cracked and spalled. It's not terrible, but I would say there are some issues with this driveway. But the number one thing that makes this house a 3 are the missing shake shingles on the porch. And this is not necessarily something that would make it a 3 on its own, but what you're probably not seeing in this picture, this almost always causes water intrusion. And so there's probably water damage to those soffits. There's probably water damage to the porch roof. And that's something that's very observable from the exterior. That's something you can see from the street that your neighbors notice, that someone would notice if the house was for sale. And so anything like that that causes water intrusion, particularly, we identify. Just zoom in there. And then this house is a 4. Clearly, safety, structural issues. You go, oh my gosh, I know that house. You know, it's around the corner, it's in my neighborhood. And why isn't the city doing something about this? So right now, I'll share with you, because we're just about to get into the results. In October 2018, when we did this survey, there were only 7 4s citywide, and this is one of them. So that's good news. But overall, you can see all of these houses that are 4s are known to us. Most of them are probably in the nuisance process. Some of them are certainly known to the building department, maybe in court. And so rest assured that on properties like this, we are taking action, but sometimes those wheels grind slowly, as they tend to do in government. So the results for 2018, total homes that were rated, just over 13,072. 6,701 were rated 1s. This is the first time in the 3 times that we've conducted this survey that over half of the homes in the city were rated 1. I think that is a great testament, both to our landlords, to our tenants, to our homeowners, and to our building department. It shows the investment that everyone has put into these homes over the past 6 years that we've been performing this survey. 90% of the homes are 1 or 2s. There were 1,248 3s, so just about 10% of the residential structures in the city are of concern to us as 3s or 4s. Again, this is great news. In 2012, 32% of the homes were 1s. That's 51% now. In 2012, there were 46 ratings of 4. So a lot more houses that were going through that nuisance process, that were going through foreclosure and land banking and other steps such as that. So overall, this picture is really strong. On a neighborhood sort of level, I'll slow down just a moment and explain this map. So this is a map of the city based on the results of the 2012 survey. And the percentages that you see and the color coding that you see from green to red are the percent of structures in these are census block groups. So they're little neighborhoods of 3 or 4 streets in most cases, 500 structures or so that are rated 3 or 4. So the percentage of structures in these little sub-neighborhoods that were rented 3 or 4. And what you see in 2012 is sort of through the midsection of the city, right along this Warren Road corridor, were some of our areas of highest concern. Just to give you a comparison that we can carry forward, this corner here is Birdtown. That census block group captures almost all of Birdtown. And in 2012, 19% of the structures were rated 3 or 4. So flipping this to 2016, you see that the number of 3s and 4s in Birdtown has jumped a little bit. This census block group, 34% now are rated 3 or 4. A lot of concerted enforcement after that 2012 survey was through the center of the city, and you can see how those census block groups have improved. Some of these on the east end, there's 2 little block groups here where more than half of the structures were rated 3 or 4. That's a little bit deceiving because there really aren't a lot of 1, 2, and 3 family structures in these areas, so it can be pretty swingy. But again, that was an area of concern for us. That was a place where we spent a lot of enforcement time. It's a place where we spent a lot of grant dollars. It's a place where we directed Lakewood Alive to spend some of their efforts. And when we moved to the 2018 survey, we can see marked improvement in those areas. So from over 50% 3s and 4s in these 2 little sub-neighborhoods to 32% and 39%. Again, improvement in Birdtown, not quite back to where it was in 2012, but better than 2016. A quarter of the properties in Birdtown were rated 3s and 4s. And a little bit of backsliding through the center portion of the city. But again, overall, this shows a great improvement. It shows sort of a rising tide of investment in these properties, and we're very excited to see these results. So how are we using this data to make better decisions both in City Hall and outside of City Hall? Well, we're taking this data because we have it by parcel. So you know, the piece of property you own has a parcel number, and that can be cross-referenced with all sorts of other data sources, both within City Hall, within the county, and other places. So we looked at the median age of the structure, and we said, are we sure we're not just rating old houses as 3s and 4s? And we're not. The median age of every rating is essentially the same, and it reflects the overall age of the housing stock in Lakewood. Something that we sort of knew anecdotally, but we proved out with this data, if the owner of the property doesn't live there and doesn't live in the city, it's more likely to have exterior code violations. This makes sense. If you're a landlord who's out of town or out of state, you don't have eyes on that property as often. You might have a property manager, you might be leaving some things up to your tenants. It's just more likely to have issues. And so we're developing some strategy around these properties, how we communicate to those landlords who are sometimes a little bit harder to find than the ones who are in town or in close proximity to us, and how we deal with enforcement on these sorts of properties. A vacant property is more likely to have exterior code violations. That's probably no surprise to anyone. An unoccupied structure tends to decline pretty quickly. So there are 50 3s and 4s out of those 1,100 that are marked by the Postal Service as vacant right now. Again, someplace we're developing strategy and saying, okay, how do we reach out to these landlords or to these homeowners, get these homes occupied? What other issues do they have that we can help to unlock that, get it back into productive use, and get it back out of a state of decline? Absolutely. So a very exciting place that we've matched this data set up to is building permit data. So in 2012 and 2016, we got a lot of calls after we went out with these letters to the 3s and 4s, and people said, I'm already investing in my home. What do you mean I have to repair my driveway? So 140 of those 1,100 have had more than $2,500 in permit valuation over the last 2 years. When we are noticing these properties, we're paying attention to this. We're going to approach these properties in a different way with a different approach. We understand the investments that you're already making. So I'm going to breeze through quickly because I know I'm up against the time, Kevin. Looking across our 3 surveys, there were 147 properties that were consistently rated 3 or 4. So not making the improvements that we sometimes would expect, just sort of bumping along at compliance. Again, a place that we're looking for strategy opportunities. This is a home that was a 4, went through tax foreclosure, nuisance demolition, was acquired by the land bank, sold to the developer, and was redeveloped as an infill property. This is one case of a success story of this. I think there are a lot of different kinds of success stories that come out of the Housing Forward approach. So over the next couple months, we'll be sending targeted letters to different audiences, speaking more to the situation at this particular property if there is an issue of exterior code compliance. We'll also be targeting folks for assistance, especially folks who we particularly think are likely to qualify for products like this. And finally, why is this important? Everyone got their new valuations this summer. It's certainly been difficult to get some of those larger tax bills, but again, that reflects the rising value of housing in Lakewood. Some of this is market force driven, but I also believe that a lot of it is driven by our strategy, by our approach over the past 6 years to housing, to being deliberate, to being consistent and fair in our application of particularly the exterior standards. So we hope that you can see how this protects your investment, protects your neighborhood if you live here as well as own property here. And overall, if you have any questions, I'm not able to stick around tonight, but I am happy to take your questions at planning@lakewoodoh.net. If you have and the mayor will take them at the end of the night. If you'd like to know about your particular property, you want to get ahead of this a little bit, I'm happy to page through the results and give those to you. If you have questions about the methodology or the strategy overall, I'm also happy to take those questions. So thanks so much for your time. Make sure to write that down, planning@lakewoodoh.net, and thank you again.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, Alex. Very enlightening, and as the mayor indicated, we'll be around to answer questions about that. Alex, did you bring a map tonight or no?
What's that?
Did you bring a map tonight or no?
No.
Okay, all right. So make sure to write that address down. Call the planning department if you're interested in actually finding out about how your own property rated. We're going to spend the balance of our time tonight talking about housing vouchers, and these are vouchers that would be offered to low-income tenants. And I'll explain why we're talking about that in just a moment. So there has been an ordinance introduced in Lakewood by a council member that would add to the list of prohibitions by landlords, a prohibition against refusing to accept a housing voucher. That is to say, the prohibition really would place, along with race, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, religion, and other protected classes, family status, it would place source of income among those protected categories, which means that if a person had a source of income that did not come, let's say, from the person's own employment, but instead came from a housing voucher supplied by an agency, the landlord would be prohibited from discriminating against that prospective tenant just based on the source of income. So that is an ordinance that's been introduced and is sitting right now in a council committee. It has not been adopted, I should tell you. We did mention it the last seminar in September. It had been introduced at that point. It's still sitting in council committee and is being deliberated on by council members and the mayor and his administration. That ordinance really, I think, does follow a national trend. There are some states that prohibit that kind of discrimination statewide, and there are many municipalities that do as well. I know that there are some local area municipalities that prohibit source of income discrimination. So we pledged to study the issue more fully as an administration, and so we're really here tonight as a result of the first part of our studying of the issue. We've talked to some stakeholders, interested stakeholders. Some of you may have already had conversations with us about that. Some of you have appeared at council committee meetings on that. Appreciate your attendance at those. But what we did as a first step was offer a survey to landlords. Many of you, I hope, received that. And we wanted you to share your earnest feedback on whether or not you participate in voucher programs, what you think of them, what your expectations of those programs are, what your impressions are, whether you participate or not. And we really wanted to get a climate from those of you in the room on these kinds of programs so that we could use that in our deliberations. And it's important to us, as you know, 54% of our housing is rental. That's about 14,000 plus units in the city. So it's big business in Lakewood. It means we've got to take these kinds of questions very, very seriously. And I know City Council does as well. So I want to just tell you a little bit about the survey that we conducted. This was all in January of 2019. We emailed it to over 1,500 unique landlord addresses. So some of you may have gotten that email, I don't know, multiple times, but in any event, over 1,500 landlord addresses, and about a quarter of you responded to the survey, which we found to be very encouraging. The results bore out that those who responded have been landlords. 80% of those who responded have been landlords for more than 5 years, about 50% more than 15 years. And 60% of those who responded own 4 or fewer units. So that really does sort of take a good snapshot of Lakewood itself with all of our very tightly packed individual homes. Only 18% of the landlords who responded accept housing vouchers, and this was consistent across the board, whether you were a landlord for a long period of time or a shorter period of time, and whether you owned multifamily units or smaller homes that you let out. Only 18% of you accept housing vouchers at this point. 78% of those landlords who actually accept vouchers say that vouchers pay rent on time. That is, participating in the voucher program means that you're going to get an on-time rent payment. That number dips for those landlords overall, which means that landlords who don't participate in the program or have stopped participating in the program, they say that either there's more question as to whether or not they pay on time, or that they don't pay as much on time. And there appears to be a lack of clarity from the survey results, which, by the way, you all have, because you got those as you entered today. There appears to be a lack of clarity on whether vouchers offer market rate or below market rents. This was good information for us because we really do want to try to find out what you know about the program, and frankly, we are in City Hall novices on the question. 50% of landlords believe voucher holders will cause more damage than non-voucher holder tenants. That's across the board. But that number falls to 33% of those landlords who responded who actually accept vouchers. So those of you who are currently accepting vouchers, only a third of you think that voucher tenants cause more damage than non-voucher tenants. There's a similar result where the overall number is higher for those asked the question, is it easier to evict a voucher tenant? The overall response was, it's harder. That number dipped for those landlords who actually accept vouchers. It appears there's a strong consensus in the room that landlords don't have to accept vouchers for every unit in a building, and then they can accept vouchers on a piecemeal basis. So that question was pretty clear, I think, to all responding. Half of our landlords overall, however, think voucher programs add higher inspection standards than the inspection standards caused by the city or imposed by the city. And half of landlords think voucher programs add additional red tape, which I've called colloquially red tape. That is the process of signing up and and dealing with a third-party voucher program. And it does appear as if the survey results are somewhat unclear on whether or not landlords have the ability to raise rents on voucher-holding tenants, and whether or not tenants can be penalized for violating voucher program rules and lease rules. That is to say, whether or not tenants can have vouchers removed or taken away from them if they don't behave well. There wasn't a strong, clear response on those questions. So, we got, in any question that offered a response of "I don't know," we got somewhere between 30 and 50% of respondents saying "I don't know the answer to that question." That to me suggests that there was room for education, and I will say that I'm pleased that we're going to be able to offer some of that education tonight. 22% of all landlords wanted to learn more about voucher programs. That tracks pretty well with a number of those who accept vouchers and who don't accept vouchers. That was an 80-20 split. I don't know if the numbers marry exactly, but it tracks pretty closely. So only 22% of our landlords wanted to learn more about vouchers. But still, that number is significant enough that we thought that we would use this opportunity tonight to provide some education on voucher programs in general. So our next two speakers, in fact, our next, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 speakers, in the time we've got allotted, will help educate all of us on how the voucher programs operate and maybe dispel some of the, or answer some of the questions that have been raised as a result of those survey results. I'm going to first welcome to the lectern, Jeff, you want to come up here to present, right? Jeff Wade, who's Chief of Staff, he's a Lakewood resident, he's Chief of Staff of CMHA. He's an attorney, and he'll give you CMHA's perspective, perhaps, on voucher programs and some of the higher level overview of the program itself in his presentation. Let me bring that up, Jeff, okay? You can either use forward and back, or you can use the wheel. I would suggest you just use that. It's a little easier.
Cool.
All right.
Well, good evening. On behalf of our Chief Executive Officer, Jeffrey Patterson, and our Board of Commissioners, I'd like to thank Mayor Summers and Mr. Butler for this opportunity to just have a conversation about the Housing Choice Voucher Program and to give some information on our program. So first, that the mission of our housing authority is to create safe, quality, affordable housing opportunities and improve the quality of lives for the communities that we serve. Our Housing Choice Voucher Program is federally funded through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Housing Choice is the nation's largest low-income rental assistance program with the goal of providing rental assistance to help low-income persons afford housing in the private market. So a little of the details about the program itself. In Cuyahoga County, there are actually 2 housing authorities, CMHA, of course, and Parma. Parma has a much smaller scale than CMHA. CMHA currently administers more than 15,000 vouchers across the county. We have in the program currently more than 5,000 landlords that accept vouchers for units that they offer. The thing that is different about the voucher program that is unique is that it does introduce a third leg into what's typically a 2-party relationship. So you as a landlord will typically, in your the tenants that approach you in just the open marketplace, you have a showing, you accept applications, you perhaps run background checks, and you make a determination on whether or not to invite that tenant to become, that candidate to become a tenant at your property. When a voucher is involved in that transaction, a couple different things occurs. First of all, the individual approaching you must have a voucher. And one of the things that we indicated on a prior slide was that that's a process that those who are interested in a voucher have to go through a process to actually even be considered and on a list in order to have that voucher. So that occurs between CMHA and that participant. Once an individual has a voucher as a participant, they can then take that voucher into the communities that they're interested in living in. So whether it's Lakewood, whether it's Garfield, whether it's Cleveland Heights, they can go to any unit that's offered for rent and engage in that same process to apply, to express their interest in that unit. As that develops, then CMHA will become involved. And that's what Ms. Dorovet Nolan, our Acting Director of Housing Choice Voucher Program, will overview for you in the next few slides. Dora?
Oh, oh. All right, I went too far. Yeah, I got, I was like, I don't know, it's going crazy. I didn't do that. I'm hitting like one button, I promise.
Sorry. Yeah, so you want to go to where?
Just go back to where it says step one.
I'm going forward, I'm sorry. There you go, so just use,
Yeah, I was.
okay.
It totally was. Okay, so I know you're asking yourselves, how do I become a landlord participating in the Housing Choice Voucher Program? So the first step would be to advertise your property just like you would advertise for any other tenancy that you're seeking. So you can more than likely seek out voucher participants if you advertise on websites that they frequently use, like Go Section 8 or housingcleveland.org, but you can advertise your unit anywhere. Next, it is your responsibility to screen your applicants just as you would any unsubsidized applicant. So if you do a background check for somebody who has a voucher, you would do the same background check and run the same criteria for somebody who doesn't have a voucher. You can do any one of these things, required employment references or anything like that, just as you would for a regular tenant. The Fair Housing Act just reminds us that it is unlawful to discriminate against race, color, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability. And this is just a reminder that that holds true to voucher participants as well. It would be your responsibility as a landlord to be current with any local requirements in your city as far as rental properties. So you would be responsible for any city or building department requirements or licenses. Ensure your property is not currently in foreclosure. You've passed a city inspection if it's required, and you would also be required to pass a housing quality inspection, which is our HQS inspection. We do have our housing quality standards inspection, or HQS, I'm going to refer to it as HQS from here going forward, checklist as a guide on our website, as well as a lot more information about how to become a landlord and what you have to do to go through the process, available on our website, cmha.net. A little bit about the voucher. The voucher on it has a term, so it has an effective date and an expiration date. This references the time period that the tenant has in order to search for a viable unit. It's typically between 60 and 120 days, but it can be extended. Secondly, the voucher size refers to the number of bedrooms that the applicant or the participant is eligible for. The voucher does not have a dollar amount attached to it. Size, got it? The bedroom size that the participant family is eligible for. Next, you would complete and submit what we call an RFTA, Request for Tenancy Approval packet. It has in it a few documents that are required to be completed by the landlord. So it is our RFTA, and then you're also required to complete a landlord fraud letter, landlord certification, a HUD tenancy addendum, drug-free household lease addendum, lead-based paint disclosure, and if you're a new landlord to our program, you're also going to have to complete a direct deposit form, a W-9 form, and an agent form. And we typically encourage landlords to return these documents themselves or come with the tenant if you're going to have the tenant be the person to turn in the RAFTA. So you would return the packet one of three ways. So you can come in person to 8120 Kinsman anytime that we are open between the hours of 8 and 5 and come in and turn in your packet. Once you, or you can fax it to our dedicated fax line, or you can upload it using the landlord portal. The landlord portal is available to landlords that have already been part of our process. So if you're new to our process, you will have to use one of the other two methods. We will, for you, review all of the documents in the RFTA process, review the verify ownership, and confirm that the unit is not in foreclosure and is current on their property taxes before we move forward in processing. And this is information that's available on our landlord portal, so you can get information once you've signed up. You can get information about 1099s, remittance statements, inspection history, inspection appointment times. You can submit inquiries, and you can get payment information and make rent adjustments requests through the portal. On the RAFTA, it's going to ask you to identify who is responsible for which utilities. So as part of the process, you have to clearly identify who's going to be responsible for the electricity, the gas, the water, the sewer, trash, what have you. And then changes in responsibility must be clearly communicated to CMHA and approved before those changes can go into effect, because they will affect the current contract that is in place for the unit. And next, my colleague, Tiffany Wright, who is the ombudsman for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, is going to go over the following steps about our inspections process.
Okay, hello. As Ms. Nolan said, my name is Tiffany Wright. I'm the ombudsman for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And I'm going to end this presentation with the next steps that you have to take. I do want to say it is a lot of information. We do offer landlord training for our new landlords. You can find those dates on our website. We offer them at our main office and also at various locations, usually libraries and throughout the county. Okay, so next, after you submit your RAFTA, we'll have an inspection schedule for you. Usually that's scheduled within 2 weeks of the RAFTA being received. And you'll get a letter with the scheduled date. It will be mailed to the landlord at the address provided. We have an outside contractor who does all of our inspections. That's Metro Inspection LLC. And they're responsible for our initial inspections and also for our annual inspections. So as we said, each unit must pass an HQS inspection, and you can find those standards on our website. The landlord or a representative over the age of 18 must be present at the unit, and if no one is home, it will be considered a failed inspection. You only get 2 times to fail an initial inspection, so you want to make sure you have somebody there, or you have to restart the process all over. New units must be vacant at the time of inspection. All utilities that are the responsibility of the landlord must be on and operational at the time of the inspection, and all appliances that are on must be properly installed and operational. If you have a multi-family building, we do inspect for common areas because we want to make sure that all hazards that could possibly affect our tenant, and any tenant in the building, but specifically to our tenant, are taken care of. We verify that all the central heating systems and water heaters are compliant with safety regulations. We check for boiler certificates and elevator certificates. Let's go back. Okay, and as Mr. Butler mentioned earlier, just in general, in our county, we have a older housing stock, so we too are very interested and invested in making sure that we follow lead safety protocols. And so part of our HQS inspection makes sure that specifically for children under the age of 6 on a family composition, we want to make sure there's no peeling paint or anything that would identify, signify there might be some exposure, to lead. So once you've gone through all of that and you've passed the inspection, the results are sent to our contracting department for final processing, and you'll be contacted with the rent offer and a proposed move-in date. We caution our landlords not to let people move in before that move-in date is established, because we can only pay from the beginning of that HAP contract period. The contracting department will inform you when you are able to sign your housing assistance payment contract, and that's what HAP stands for, Housing Assistance Payment Contract. Okay. That's okay. I'm going to tap lightly.
Let's try this. Where do you want to go?
Next one right there.
Right there?
Yep.
Yep, sorry.
Okay.
There you go.
So we talk about how much the tenant has to pay and how much CMHA would pay towards your contract rent. You're going to have, generally, the family is required to contribute a minimum of 30% of their adjusted income towards their housing costs. That's going to be the contract rent and the built-in utilities. A family may contribute up to a maximum of 40% of their adjusted income towards the housing costs during the initial year of the contract. So that is the cap. You can request a rent increase after the first year, and then they could go beyond that 40%. It's all on a case-by-case basis. And after whatever the tenant pays, then the owner will receive the difference from CMHA, so that is that HAP portion that we're referring to. CMHA pays that amount. Also, we'd like to point out that the tenant may not pay more than the CMHA-approved portion. So that's considered a side payment. Side payments are prohibited from HUD and CMHA. It is illegal to receive payments beyond what was approved by CMHA for the tenant. Actionable offenses under the federal law, and anyone found guilty of violating this act can be heavily fined. So we do stress that whatever you decide to charge, whatever the agreement is, what's on your letter that you get is what the tenant pays, and you can always ask for a rent increase after the first year. Security deposit. Tenants are responsible for their own security deposit. CMHA does not pay a security deposit on their behalf, and your policies should be in writing and in accordance with Ohio's law. You can charge your tenant whatever you would charge a regular market rate tenant if it's 1 month, first and last month. That's up to you as a landlord to make that decision. Step 6, monthly payments. We have payment check runs around the 3rd and the 15th of every month. You get your payment via direct deposit. We do not do any paper checks. Direct deposit is mandatory for all owners, but it is your responsibility to collect the tenant's portion of the rent, so that's that 30%. After after being under contract for 1 year, we do re-inspect all units annually, and the inspection will be scheduled. Both the landlord and the tenant will receive a letter and notification on the portals prior to the inspection date, and it's the same HQS standards that were required at the beginning. You're going to make sure that your units are in compliance at that time. You usually get the results within 24 to 48 hours after an inspection has been conducted, and you do have an opportunity, if you don't pass the first time, to have another inspection, and if you don't pass that time, you will have an opportunity to have a third inspection. There are some consequences if it's not after the second inspection, but we still have 3 opportunities to pass before your contract would be canceled. We also have what's called emergency and special inspections. An emergency inspection is a health and safety violation. So if there's something that's putting the tenant in jeopardy, such as no electricity, no heat, non-working appliances, such as the stove or an inoperable smoke detector, those could be a landlord or a tenant fail based on who's responsible for the electricity or the appliance. Also, sometimes we'll have what's a special inspection. You will get people to call in. There may be a complaint by the tenant or the municipality or neighbors on the condition of a unit. And an example of that is an infestation. After 1 year, tenants are permitted to move after the initial lease term. All moves must take place in accordance with the lease, and failure by the tenant to give notice to the landlord in accordance with the lease is a lease violation. We do notify the landlords once we receive a RFTA, which is that moving packet, to let them know that the tenants plan on moving and they've submitted paperwork to move from the unit. We do try our best to make sure that they're adhering to their lease as much as we can, and if they don't, that is a violation of our program, and we make sure to enforce that as it comes about. And I think that is all. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Let me pull up, the next presentation by Jen Griffin with Eden, which is another program that offers tenants housing vouchers, and another program that is active in Lakewood. Let me ask this question, maybe, I don't know, Dory, if you would know off the top of your head, about how many units does CMHA support right now in Lakewood, do you know? Just under 300, and Mayor's got probably a slightly older figure of 317. And then, are we allowed to know how many Eden units are in Lakewood right now?
No, I did not look that up before I came, so I'm not sure. Thank you.
Mayor says 189, and the mayor is my boss, so it's 189. So all told, right now, between these two presentations, we're talking about around 500 units. Okay, Jen Griffin, why don't you see if you can supplement anything that might have been said earlier, and then we can get into some Q&A. Thanks. Yeah, and just go light, and if it's not working, be patient.
Okay.
We'll figure something out. Sorry.
So my presentation has a lot of the same slide and information as the CMHA presentation. So I'm going to just quickly go through the things that overlap. This presentation is also done in our landlord forums, which we have monthly. I have a sheet with all of our upcoming landlord forums. So if anyone is interested in getting in more detail in a smaller session, more one-on-one questions, you can pick up a sheet on the table with those dates. So Eden is a nonprofit housing organization. Our mission is to provide housing solutions to people facing the challenges of housing insecurities and homelessness. We own and operate 80 properties in Cuyahoga County ourselves, and we manage 10 permanent supported housing buildings and administer 11 affordable housing programs throughout the county. However, a lot of those programs do operate similarly. So this is some of the things that I'm going to be going over, but a lot of it has already been covered by the CMHA staff, so thank you. I just wanted to give a quick overview. I know this is very hard to see, but it kind of gives a description of all the different programs that Eden has. The one that most people are familiar with is our Shelter Plus Care program, because we have the most participants on that program. But as you can see, we also have a variety of other programs. They all run very similarly. They're permanent voucher programs, and at the bottom you'll see some rapid rehousing programs or temporary assistance. So when a tenant approaches you, or a potential tenant, you'll definitely want to ask them what voucher program they are a part of, so you have an idea of how long the subsidy may last, whether it's permanent or a temporary. This slide looks very similar. Screening your tenants. Eden does not screen tenants. That would be the landlord's responsibility. So just make sure you're treating your potential Eden tenants the same way that you would treat any other potential tenants that are looking to rent your property. We call our request for lease approval packet, it's very similar to the RFTA, we call it an RFLA. But this is the form that starts the process of someone moving into your property. So the processing time for the request for lease approval differs between our two programs. So for our permanent subsidy programs, the process is approximately 3 weeks. And for our rapid rehousing program, it's a much faster paced program, and so the process is usually 1 week. So it begins with a rent determination and inspection, and then that move-in process. So very similar to CMHA. Documents that would be submitted with the request for lease approval are a W-9, your certification of occupancy, and then we do ask for documentation that taxes are current on the unit. This is just what our request for lease approval packet looks like. Just wanted to kind of give an overview of it, but I'm just going to kind of quickly go through that. So this just filled out with the landlord's information. Make sure as you're filling this paperwork out that it's filled in clearly and legibly and all the way filled out, because if it's not, that just delays the process a little bit. So both the client and the landlord are signing off on this information, and it's just a description of the unit that the tenant would be renting. And this is the disclosure of lead-based paint page, which is hopefully very familiar. And then our W-9 that needs to be submitted with any new landlords that haven't worked with our program before. So our rent calculations are done using a two-step process. One is using rent reasonable. We use Go Section 8, similarly to CMHA, to find out what the comparable units in the area of your unit are. And it pulls units based on the size, the location, the amenities that are included with the unit, and the utilities that are included. We also look at fair market rents. So this is kind of a detailed process, so I'm happy to go over it with anyone if you would like to. But it basically uses the FMRs for the bedroom size, and we take the utilities that the tenant would be responsible for, subtracting them from the FMR to come up with a total rent. So a lot of questions that landlords have are usually surrounding how much rent can I get for the unit, and this is just a very overall view of how that's calculated. So a combination of your fair market rents and the rent reasonables in the area. So some things to keep in mind, the participants on the permanent voucher, their rent portion could change throughout the course of the tenancy. So they also pay 30% of their income towards the rent and utilities. So if in the beginning of the program they don't have any income, Eden would be paying the full rent. And as they gain income over the course of their tenancy, they would then be paying 30% of their income towards the rent, and Eden would subsidize the rest. Once you accept the rent amount, you can't ask for a side payment or anything extra. So housing quality standards, or HQS, is the next step after the rent calculation has been completed. So once the RFLA is turned in, we calculate the rent and we're able to pay what you're asking for. The process moves on to our housing quality standards, or inspections. So to prepare for inspections, your unit must be vacant. The utilities must be on. If you're supplying appliances, those need to be present. You need a smoke detector, GFIs, all of those basic items. And you can find a list of minimum inspection requirements on our website. And it's just a kind of a list of the things that you should be kind of preparing for when an inspector would be coming out. In order to expedite the process, the repair should really be done before our inspector comes out to the unit, so it's all ready to go when we come out. If the repairs take over 30 days, the RFLA would need to be resubmitted so we can kind of keep the process going. Units are inspected annually, and if the units don't pass inspection, you are given 30 days to make the repairs and have the inspector come back out. For the rapid rehousing inspection, again, that process is a little bit faster. So an inspection for rapid rehousing usually takes place within 1 week of submitting the paperwork or the request for lease approval. So once your unit passes inspection, we move on to finalizing your move-in. So our certification processor will call for a final rent determination with what the client's portion is, what the Eden subsidy payment is, advising on who's paying the security deposit, and we would request a move-in date. From that move-in date is the date that your rent would start. For the rapid rehousing program, payment starts the day the unit passes inspection. So the expectation would be that the day the unit passes, the tenant would move in and you would start receiving your payment from that date. Once the move-in date is set, the tenant would receive their keys. You would draft a lease agreement with that date, and you would receive a HAP contract in the mail. So you'll sign and return that HAP contract. Again, this is specifically to our permanent housing programs. We also have direct deposit, and we encourage all of our landlords to sign up for direct deposit just so you can get your payments more quickly. For the ongoing tenancy for our permanent voucher participants, monthly rental payments are made between the 1st and the 4th of the month. As I already stated, the annual inspections are completed each year. We do have stability specialists on staff. I actually have one here with me to help field questions. But our stability specialists are on staff to intervene if you are having an issue with a tenant and you need some intervention. You can contact our offices, and a stability specialist can go out to the unit to try and mediate the situation. Tenants are permitted to move after their initial lease agreement ends. And we just ask that landlords notify us if there's any change in the ownership of the property, if your tenant has vacated, if you are having any issues, if you've issued a 30-day or a 3-day notice to your tenant, to let us know that, and if you would like an increase to the rent. You can increase your rent amount annually. We just ask that you give us a written notice at least 45 days before the rent increase becomes in effect. We have forms online which you can fill out, and the process is very similar to when they first move in, where we do a rent reasonable test, look at the FMRs, but you can, after 1 year and subsequently every year, receive a rent increase if you ask. For security deposits, Eden does not always pay the security deposit, but if it's their first unit on the program, we do pay the first security deposit. And if they're in the rapid rehousing program, we always pay their deposit. The security deposits for our permanent programs would come back to Eden once the tenant were to move out of the unit. And for our rapid rehousing participants, the security deposit would go directly to the tenant if they have a security deposit. So the final part is just listing your property with Eden. I do have some property listing forms as well if anyone is interested in listing your property on our units available list. The units available list goes out to all of our housing locators weekly and to our stability specialists who are helping clients find units. So it's usually a pretty fast turnaround if you have an available unit to get that unit leased up. So if you would like a form to take with you or to fill out, you can pick one up, or you can go onto our website and also list your property there. My name is Jen Griffin. That's my contact information. We also have a specific staff, a community housing agent. Her name is Nicole Eubanks, and her role at Eden is specifically in building landlord relationships, recruiting landlords, trying to maintain our relationships with landlords in the community. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here tonight, but that is her information, and you can always contact either of us if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I want to be clear to those of you in the room that the mayor's administration has not adopted the mayor and his administration has not adopted a response at this point to the pending legislation. The mayor did at the last landlord seminar, I don't want to speak for you, Mayor, right here, but did say publicly that he was not in favor of it, and that remains the case. He's not in favor of the ordinance as it's currently introduced. So I don't want you to think that by the presentation tonight, it's some sort of policy statement on behalf of the administration. It's not. We really genuinely are trying to do due diligence on the question of affordable housing and the question of whether or not vouchers ought to be mandated in Lakewood. The survey results tonight, the presentations from our partners, CMHA and Eden, all are very helpful to us and to help us understand the issues at hand. I just want to be very clear about that. I want to be also clear to those of you who were clapping a moment ago, this is not some sort of policy statement against the ordinance that's been introduced. It's not what we're here to do either. We're not advocating one way or the other tonight. We're gaining information. So with all of that said, that's where I want to begin our question and answer session. I don't want this to be a debate on the ordinance that is before us. I don't want this session tonight in particular to turn into a debate on that. Certainly good questions of the people who are here tonight would be helpful, including the administration if necessary. But really this is not about whether or not that law ought to be passed. We're here because the law was introduced, but we're not here to solve that question tonight, okay? I hope you'll respect that because we're all going to be waiting for good questions and answers tonight. Mayor, do you want to add anything before we formally adjourn and allow those who want to go to go?
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for coming out tonight. And I know many of you here for this particular reason. I don't know about you, but I learned a great deal tonight, much of which I did not fully understand how this works, and I'm grateful for that. I do want to confirm that the ordinance as drafted, I think, has a lot of problems. I do think the issue of affordable housing, though, is a very important question for the city of Lakewood and every city across the country. It is an issue of opportunity, and it's also an issue of quality of life and experience. How many of you had the chance to grow up in Lakewood as I did? So you know that we had the good fortune to grow up here with a wide range of economic experiences of the homes of the kids that we grew up in. The market forces delivered that to Lakewood. The question before us really is, what are those market forces today and what will they deliver in the future? And if they don't deliver the future that we think is respectful of the kind of community we've enjoyed, then what would be an appropriate intervention, if any? That is the question I think Lakewood should thoughtfully reflect. I believe that we have good experience with vouchers. We have pretty close to 900 subsidized units. 5.7% of 16,000 rental units are subsidized for low-income folks. I have no idea whether that's the right number, whether it's too small or too big, but I will tell you that we have basically 1,000 households that are subsidized living in our community successfully. So that doesn't necessarily mean that a subsidy is a disadvantage. I think the key for us is to understand more fully the neighborhoods, the context, your rights as a landlord, as a private property owner, and the magnificent responsibilities and obligations that creates, and figure out how we can thread this needle appropriately. That's the best way for Lakewood. And I'm grateful for CMHA and Eden to come in and share their experience with us tonight. And I think we can use this new knowledge to better understand the path forward that makes sense for all citizens in the region and for our neighborhoods as well. So that's the basis from which we launch, and I'm grateful you're here to begin that conversation. So I would invite CMHA for questions. Why don't you folks come over here to the microphone? We're sitting in the front so that we can avail.
All right, so I think now would probably be a good time while we're shuffling. For those of you who'd like to go, thank you for your attendance tonight. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for your earnest attention to all the material that was presented. You're welcome to go. Please do so quietly. Restrooms, if you need to go to the restroom, are down the hallway to the left. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next one. And then for those of you who are sticking around, please do so. Just be patient for a moment. And we're not going to take questions up here, but we'll begin Q&A in just a moment. First things first. The Myers family has been waiting patiently up here for insurance questions. Does anyone have insurance questions? Councilman Anderson. Councilman Anderson has an insurance question.
Yeah, I'm curious as to whether CMHA or Eden has a position on whether or not requiring that potential tenants have or have renters insurance in any way invalidates the agreement for the subsidized voucher through either Eden or CMHA.
All right, so I'll repeat. Let me just see if I can digest this accurately, Councilman Anderson. Dave Anderson is the representative of Ward 1, which is the westernmost quarter of the city. Thanks, Dave, for being here. He's also a landlord. The question, I think, was, would a requirement that a landlord force a tenant to purchase a policy of tenant insurance, would that somehow affect the calculation or the relationship or the ability of that tenant to get a voucher under one of these programs? Anyone want to take that?
So generally, asking or encouraging a tenant to have that form of insurance is consistent with both programs, with Eden and with CMHA, so long as that ask or that requirement is consistent with law. So, so long as it's consistent with all applicable law, it would also be consistent with our program requirements. The only thing that it couldn't do is it couldn't actually impose a cost on the family that isn't part of the calculation for rent. So that would have to be disclosed, I think, up front. Is that correct, Dory? So that it's part of the lease costs for that unit. Jen, do you have anything?
Just that I agree with what you're saying.
Any other questions about insurance products? Yes, any other questions about insurance project?
No, that's not what it said. That decision is between landlord. Thank you, Dory. That is a landlord-tenant decision. That if it's your market approach, your decision as a property owner or as the manager to require insurance of your tenant, that is acceptable under these types of programs. Once again, so long as nothing in the ask of the tenant is in some way not consistent with either the city ordinance or with any state law.
All right, let's just a couple ground rules, and I appreciate the question. I need to recognize you, okay, so that we make sure to address these in an orderly fashion. So, is your question about an insurance?
You said as long as the law permits it. If there's no law in the city of Lakewood to have insurance, tenant's insurance.
There's no obligation. There's no prohibition or obligation in Lakewood.
No, but he said as long as it's per law, so as a landlord, I want my tenants to have it, but it's not a law in Lakewood, will CMHA pay for it?
Did you all hear that question in the back?
Okay, so I'll take that question. You can require your tenant to have renter's insurance. You just have to make sure that whatever is in your lease is applicable to all of your tenants. You can't specify only CMHA participants have to have renter's insurance. So that would be the law. That would be the legal violation
Oops.
that we're speaking. Your lease across the board, and you require all of your tenants to have renter's insurance. You can do that.
Okay, just a moment. One last introduction or introductory remark. The folks who here from Eden and CMHA are here at our invitation to be able to present to you on this material. They are not behind the ordinance, so far as I can tell. I'm sure they, I'm sure because they work in this environment, they may have feelings on the ordinance, but they're not behind it. And I want to make sure that you all know that they're not here as advocates for that ordinance either, okay? They're here really to answer questions about the program. Please keep that in mind. Let's go, gentlemen, the Ohio State sweatshirt. All right, to the Myers family. Jennifer, Bob, what does renter's insurance cost these days? Did that go to green?
Renter's insurance typically, depending on which company or which carrier that we would place you with, can run anywhere, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. It's credit, it's location, it's 1,200 other things that the insurance companies put into it, but typically between 100 and maybe 300 for a year. Yeah, 100 and 150 for basic, 15,000 in coverage. I would still recommend that everybody have their tenants carry 300
In liability?
in liability coverage, yes.
So that 15,000 isn't liability, it's what?
The 15,000 is personal property, so that's everything from their couch down to their toothbrush of what type of coverage they would need.
What do you suppose that additional coverage would cost?
I'm sorry?
What do you suppose that additional 300,000 in liability coverage would cost?
Like between $12 for,
Oh, I see, okay, I got it, an additional $12. All right, thanks. Any other insurance questions before I try to spring the Myerses? Yes,
The tenant has $300,000 liability coverage. You as a landlord have liability coverage. Do we have duplicate coverage going on here, or are there?
no. They're for.
Jennifer, can I just repeat the question? The question is, the tenant can obtain that liability coverage, and the landlord also has coverage protecting the property. Are they duplications of one another?
So the liability for renters would be in their unit, a guest coming into their home. Let's say they had a candle burning and they didn't blow it out and it burnt down a portion of the home. That liability would be there for that purpose. Your liability would be driveway. They slip and fall in the driveway, something along that line. Right, right. Common areas versus their actual apartment area.
Any other insurance-related questions we can have answered? Yes, on the end there.
Question in regards to the Federal Pacific panel that you brought up just briefly. The properties that I have, do have, I say half of them have Federal Pacific breakers or panels in them. And being in the business, I know a lot of customers will have the same situation. We're all covered currently in their insurance, but what's the trend? Where's this going?
Did anyone in the
They
back
want-
not hear that? Raise your hand if you didn't hear the question. All right, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay, the federal breakers, insurance companies do not want. If they send out an LC, loss control person, and they see it's federal, they'll give you 30 days to get it replaced. So if you have those, I'd say get them replaced as soon as possible. It's also because of the fire hazard. There's been several fires because of shorts with the panels themselves. So
Also, insurance companies do come out and do inspections. My father and I will come out, we'll do an initial inspection. We'll usually come out and take a front and back photo. And just kind of look at the maintenance. Both of us come from an inspection background, so sometimes it's a little bit more involved. But the insurance companies will come out and do inspections. And if they feel they need to be in your house to look at things, they will require that from you. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yes, on the end.
I have a question concerning coverage for rental houses. What happens if you, let's say, switch to your company? Would I be covered for lead remediation if someone from Lakewood or the county came in and found lead contamination in the house? Or is that specifically excluded in the policy?
we have several carriers that we deal with, and they all have separate endorsements and separate coverages. There may be some that would cover that, but there may be, again, more that won't cover it than would.
And you need to purchase an endorsement?
Well, if they allow you to, it depends on which company.
So then, does the inspection include a lead inspection?
Not, no. It's a lot more lenient than that. When they come out, usually when they come out, they're looking for liability hazards. Liability meaning on the exterior steps, the grading of the driveway, garage doors that are not closing or only go up halfway, which could cause a liability problem if they fall, or a leaning garage that is not stable. Those are the type of inspections. Back 20 years ago, they used to do a lot of interiors, but because of the time factor involved now, they don't. Only if there's a claim possibly that happened in the last 3 to 5 years, they may want to do an interior depending on what the type of claim was. So, but most of them are very cursory exterior inspections.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. Maybe we can switch gears. Any other pressing insurance questions? Otherwise, you can reach out to Jennifer, Bob, at your leisure, all right? And they've got cards. They can leave them out on the table for you. Thanks very much. You're welcome to stick around if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, let's move on. Yes, actually, let's hear from someone who's got a question about vouchers we haven't heard from yet, and then we'll make sure to try to get back to everyone. Yes, sir.
I'm new to this whole landlord thing. I purchased a house in October on Lakewood and was doing some renovation stuff. There was a house fire not disclosed in the purchase agreement. There's no record with the city, and I'm just curious, like from a legal perspective, or just from an adversarial or the perspective, like what's the best avenue?
So a question that has to do with whether or not there's a legal claim to be made for a house fire that wasn't disclosed. I would say that for the benefit of the general group, that's probably not an appropriate question for us to entertain tonight. I'm happy to talk to you. I can't give you legal advice, of course. My client's the city, but I'm happy to talk to you. Maybe send you in the right direction. Yes. If you think of, the question is whether or not the ordinance that was proposed mandates that you show a unit to a voucher recipient. I just want you to imagine adding source of income to the other list of protected classifications in our housing discrimination ordinance. That's really what the ordinance does. So whatever negative housing-related decisions you would make based on someone's other protected class, sex, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, whatever the case may be, you would also not be able to do based on a person's source of income. So if it would be a violation not to show a property to someone who is a minority, for example, it would also be a violation not to show a property to someone who's holding a voucher under the proposed ordinance. I just tell you. It's any type of housing-related decision that would negatively impact someone just based on the fact that they are holding a voucher. It's the same exact code written for other types of protected classes. Any negative housing-related transaction, right, or decision. Let's go to the side of the room. How about, yes, ma'am, go ahead. I think we may have heard from you, but go ahead.
With regards to the vouchers or the ordinance that he was speaking of, what if you're not discriminating against someone's income, how they pay their rent, but you're discriminating against the fact that it's going to take 3 weeks for an inspection to pass in order for you to even rent your place to them?
Yeah, the question is under the ordinance, I guess would it be, I don't want to mischaracterize what your question is, but would it be some sort of defense to an allegation that you violated this ordinance if it passes, based on the fact that you'd rather just not enter into the contractual relationship with a third party, these HAP contracts, for example, that you've heard about tonight, instead of whether the person is holding a voucher. That hasn't been tested, so far as I know, here. We really haven't made a legal analysis of that. I know that there are other forums in which that question has been tested in court. And I think Massachusetts and some others where we've seen decisions on that question. There are also some ordinances or laws that are more explicit on that very question. So as I guess to close that defense. And the law as it's currently written, that we can tell, does not have that loophole closer. So that's as much as I can tell you. We really, don't know the answer to what would happen if someone were to be accused. How about you, sir? Yeah, Beard.
For CMHA, so I've only had one experience managing property for a client that purchased the property, inherited a CMHA tenant. The tenant's percentage of contributions towards rent was significantly different than what you guys had put on your slides. And he was responsible for slightly under 2% of the rent, and is still a current tenant. That agreement was signed in 2007. I guess my question is, why would that be such a stark difference from what you guys put on the slide?
Right, so the
So-
tenants, go ahead.
So did everyone hear the question? Anyone not hear the question? Okay, thanks.
So just to clarify, the tenant's portion of rent is based on their income. It's their adjusted gross income. So they pay 30% of their income towards your rent.
Okay, so it's $625. Their responsible portion is $12. So their income is $36, about $36.
Correct. Correct.
Yes, second row.
I own a property in Cleveland currently, and I just bought property in Lakewood. Cleveland is part of a program, as are most Cuyahoga County communities, with the Heritage Loan Program through the Cleveland Restoration Society. And it's a far more, the rate is far better than the health loan program. I was wondering why Lakewood isn't part of that loan program, and if they would be willing to join up with that loan program.
All right, so I guess we're getting a little off topic, which is okay. But Mayor, why don't you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, Cleveland Renovation Society has a subsidized mortgage program that basically allows a lower home equity loan available to certain homeowners. But in order for that to happen, the cities where that applies have to pay somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000 for a few people to get a discounted mortgage. Here in Lakewood, we used to be part of that program. We felt it was a better yield of that $25,000 to work with Lakewood Alive, who directly intervenes with those 3s and 4s that we saw here that dramatically affect the quality of housing on a whole street. We found that those folks who actually enjoyed the subsidy generally had other credit, were credit worthy enough that they could get credit. It was not helping folks who could not get credit. The same standards applied in terms of credit worthiness. We were just paying money to an agency who then created a subsidy to certain folks. Here we had a small percentage of citizens who utilized that for $25,000, and we thought we had a better use for the money. That's the direct answer. Wish we could do both.
Ma'am, yes. Yes. So we do not conduct routine inspections just based on the housing license program that you're all, I'm sure, familiar with. We do, however, have periodic maintenance inspections that do permit us to request inside access to your home. It's not often the case that amendment issues as they relate to case law that's been handed down across the state. But that's it's only right now a temporary suspension, and that program may come back, in which case you're going to know about it. Thanks. Mayor, I'm not sure, I'm not sure we've got the staff right here to be able to answer that question, but
no,
I don't know how often we're getting on the inside of properties for
I
those
think I heard the
routine-
comment, it was the initial intent of the housing license. It's been difficult. We have 13,000 one and two family structures, and we have basically 5 code compliance folks and 6 inspectors. The six inspectors do new build inspection, all the renovations that you do. The honest answer, it's been an impractical challenge to meet the timeliness of those inspections. Love to figure a way to get back on track, but it's a hard lift for us. That's the honest answer. We'd love to do a better job there.
Third row.
Right, one question about the whole voucher program. If I have, one bedroom that I rent $1,500, and I consistently can rent it for $1,500, but if this is adopted, then I get a phone call from someone who has a voucher. Will I have to lower that rent if CMHA only pays so much for a one bedroom based on the market?
Okay.
Whereas if the market can bear a $1,500 rent, then I can rent that. Why do I have to lower my income to serve a Section 8 tenant?
Just want to be sure everyone heard the question. Anyone not hear the question? All right, anyone from Eden or CMHA want to?
It's confusing me about this whole thing in Lakewood.
So we will, just on the CMHA side, we will make a rent determination and a rental offer to you based on the comparables in your area. You can decline that rent offer if you feel like it's not what you want for your unit, but it will be based on the comparable units in your area that offer the same amenities and are of the same or similar size to the unit that you're offering for your tenant.
So thus far, I can say that our interpretation of the ordinance that was presented to us is that it is not a rent control. It may somehow, through its practice, result in that, and I'm not sure how, but it's not an outright prohibition on raising your rents or demanding a market-based rent. Of course, if you were to make some housing decision, such as raising your rent, based on the fact that the person in front of you is holding a voucher, then that might be an actionable violation of the ordinance.
What I'm saying is, though, if they're going to say 800, but I can give 1,500, am I going to be in violation of the city?
Certainly not as I read the ordinance, no. Yes.
Is the city of Lakewood mandated to have more, for lack of a better term, I'll call it Section 8 housing to receive state and or federal dollars now or in the near future? No. There's no regulatory oversight of this whole world as far as I can see. Is there a percentage of per population that they'd like to see as a national norm of, let's say, HUD in a population of 60,000?
Well, here's the interesting question. The answer is, that's a great question. I'd love to know the answer to that. But here's what I do know about Lakewood. We have a lot of low-income folks who live here without a voucher. And we have 14% of our population who are at the poverty level or below. And we have another 14% that are pretty close to it. So we have 1/3 almost of our population that are low-income folks, and they are living successfully in Lakewood. So, without vouchers. So the question is, we have one measure of low-income affordability. We have other things we'd love to understand more successfully. What I do worry about is, what's the trend? Are we pushing low-income folks out of our city that are successful and great neighbors? And are we putting the quality of experience that we enjoy here at risk? most of the low-income folks are not on the subsidies. They're here, and they're able to find rental or home ownership somehow. We have a lot of rents that are in the 500-plus range. They used to be, some of them in the 350 to 400 range. So the question is, these rents are rising, but are they rising faster, and are they displacing people? I'd love to get a beat on that. I hope that, does that answer your question?
Yeah, my
directly?
biggest question was on, is the city of Lakewood now or in the near future gonna be mandated to have more for you to get tax dollars from the state and or the Fed?
The answer is no.
Third row, yes, sir.
Questions about funding for CMHA and even, I think you're funded through HUD. How long are you funded through? I know we had the government shutdown here not that long ago. How long were you funded and when were you gonna run out of money through that? And then same with Eden, what are your finances?
Our funding is also mainly through HUD. We do have other programs that are funded through the county, the state, the city, but the majority of our funding is HUD dollars. And we have multiple grants. Each of them have a different start and end date. So at this point, all of our grants have start dates that are April 1st or after. So at this point, we have the funding that we need, and depending on what happens with the government shutdown, that could change. But as of right now, all of our programs have been funded through at least the end of March.
And that's similar for us as well. I think together with most citizens, particularly those that may have connections to federal programs, you know, we were very interested in what the Congress and the president and how they were going to resolve these issues, these policy issues. But in January, where we were looking at I think it extended to more than a 3-week shutdown, we still had funding for the voucher program for February and for March. So typically we're funded ahead, and in that case, we've been funded ahead at least 60 days. Well, thankfully, that's a hypothetical that we don't have to answer. It's unclear. I mean, just as a policy matter, we would hope that the federal government would never place any of these programs in that kind of jeopardy.
Understood, but had it ran its course, you would have ran out of financing in April program?
Hypothetically.
Okay. I appreciate the question. Hold on, please. Back row, yes, your hand's up in the back.
Is there any statistics for CMHA or Eden for increase in drug activity or pest on these properties?
Why don't you repeat the question, sorry?
Is there a statistic, an increase in drug activity in these properties, you know, or pest, if there's CMHA vouchers or Eden in the property?
Are you asking if there are statistics that somehow tie drug activity to voucher units, voucher accepting units? Anyone want to answer that? I certainly don't know of any.
Yes, I'm not aware of anything. I think to the contrary, most of the research that we're familiar with demonstrates that voucher holders, once they become tenants in private market units, have greater incentives to conform to your lease, to abide by law, because not only are they in jeopardy of violating your lease and a potential eviction, but they've waited, in some circumstances, years to get onto the program, to enjoy the benefits of housing choice with that voucher, and to place that in jeopardy over those types of conduct it's disincentives for that.
All right, I guess fifth row, yes, gray shirt.
If I can start with a statement, I believe it goes all back to the economics of the city and the localities. Lakewood City, even at the time of crisis, did not suffer as much as any other cities compared with the cities in the days of Lakewood. We survived with housing demolished here. That's basically because of economics. That means if the
system that is in place already where I, as a landlord, very experienced landlord, currently having Section 8, Eden, Section 8 in both counties, Lorraine and Cuyahoga, leave it to the individual, leave it to the owner, leave it to the investor, because of the fact that dealing with government such as CMHA or LMHA, it requires certain experience. I don't think if the majority of the rental units in the city of Lakewood, where you have up and down and you rent in half, that particular homeowner wants to get into that kind of system where economically, again, usually you have 2 month period before you see your first rent. The gentleman and ladies explained that the 2 weeks period, 99% at first, is making fail, and because of the experience that the individual that they have, I know that for a fact. By the time they come back in another month, by the time the rent is approved, the landlord has to wait. City of Lakewood doesn't need that. City of Lakewood, you can.
Okay, I understand you're advocating a position. I'm asking for the benefit of everyone in the room, though. Ask the question, please.
Any other communities who have enforced this ordinance, such as Shaker Heights, Newland Heights, Powell?
Okay, actually, Chris, I spot Chris Kaderi in the room. She's with the Fair Housing Center, and she actually would know exactly what communities in Northeast Ohio have similar ordinances on the books. Chris, if you don't mind.
Yeah, hi. I'll just rattle off their names. So Lindale on the west side, and on the east side there is University Heights, Warrensville Heights, and also South Euclid.
Okay, thanks. Yes, in the back corner.
Is this a foregone conclusion, basically? Is there anything we can do, especially as invested members of the community, to show our grievances or stop it in any other way?
First of all, I can't speak for the 8 people who vote on this, 7 council members and the mayor. They vote either with votes or with a signature. So I can't tell you whether it's a foregone conclusion. I certainly don't think so, based on my participation in the middle of the debate. But I guess I'd let one of the 8 answer that question.
I'll be happy to respond. I would only have a veto power. That's the only vote I have. So if council would vote 4-0, 4-3, the ordinance becomes effective. I would have a 5th vote that would veto it. They would then need 5 votes to pass this ordinance. I'm fairly certain that I can speak on the process that's ahead of us, that wherever we are, we're going to be more reflective of the marketplace they're in than where we started with this ordinance. It was, I think, intended to be a stalking horse for conversation. I think the goal, as I've mentioned, is not an unworthy one. The process of how we protect lower-income folks in our community, which we've enjoyed forever, if they need protection at all, is what we really need to be thoughtful about. So I would be very disappointed if this was a foregone conclusion. We have one of the other votes in the back. David, I don't know if you'd care to speculate on this. David's a landlord. He's a longtime city council member, chairs our housing committee.
Not a foregone conclusion at all. We've had one hearing on this piece of legislation in 2018. Looking forward to getting some feedback from the administration. Mayor Summers and his staff pledged to report back to all of City Council and the Housing Committee specifically about some efforts to, again, learn more about what's going on in our communities. And it's not a foregone conclusion to me that Lakewood has a deficit of low-income housing availability. So I'm trying to figure out whether or not this is just a stalking horse for bigger, more worthy conversation, or whether this is a fix in search of a problem. I'm not sure. But I do know that there's a lot more work to do in the Housing Committee before there'd be any consideration of a motion as to whether or not to recommend or not recommend to full council. So I look forward to the next couple of months in the Housing Committee just to figure out where this piece of legislation stands and any prospective amendments and adjustments to it. So
All those committee meetings are open to the public. All those committee meetings are open to the public. They're all posted online. At least 24 hours in advance of the meetings being called. Typically, that's well in advance of 24 hours. So just be on the lookout.
Publicly posted, but since it's directly affecting my investments, I think I should have an email, a direct email communication that this is going to happen. Like, I understand I have your card, I'm going to call you, but when you're going hey, this is happening, if you like to have a say in what we're gonna make you do with your property, please
Well-
come and give us a.
So we have an email list that many of you have signed up, and we've been trying to keep you posted through all variety of issues. How many get the email from Shannon, sends that out? So if you don't get it, well, you need to get your email, and that's how we'll keep you posted. Right.
All right, we have 3 minutes left. We have 3 minutes left, and I want everyone to be honest. If I haven't recognized you yet, keep your hand up. If I have recognized you, please put your hand down. Thanks. How about second row?
Do you guys administration plan to survey non-landlords, so owner occupants? Do they plan to survey what their feel is on this legislation?
I don't think no, I think the answer is no. We have not made plans to do that. To survey non.
It's a big impact on individuals who own their own homes.
Yeah, I mean, we don't typically survey the entire city on pieces of pending legislation. Pledge the city council, we come back with some facts. All right, one last question. No, yes. Respectfully.
I got my concerns for this program, but I also have concern the low-income person who would like to live in Lakewood and is looking to go through this particular, either one of these particular programs. I do know that on average, property taxes went up 20.5% in Lakewood. Water and sewer respectively, I think, are going up 5 or 10%. So costs to us, I do sympathize with the gentleman in the back here, and everyone else who hasn't spoken probably would say the same thing. Costs are going up for us as people who invest in property and expect some kind of return. So to be told that we've got to wait for a certain process, and this gentleman over here, a couple rows ahead of me, had a question I had as well too. Okay, so let's say someone comes in and let's just use the same scenario for sake of the argument. $1,500 for a one-bedroom. Yes, I know there are $1,500 units that are being rented that are only one bedroom in Lakewood. There are. But if someone comes up and says, I have a voucher, it's for $1,100. Okay? Let's say it's a little closer to the example that he gave. Do we have to wait for that person now? And because he or she has called us, and that person's now in the pipeline, and we cannot take another person who's willing to pay what supply and demand would dictate? This to me is awkward from the standpoint that I didn't get any federal money to actually improve my property. Why should I have to work with a federal entity in order to fill my property?
Just hoping you're about to ask a question.
Well, my question is that the complications are there. What does the city expect us to do with this measure here that's apparently on the table and up for discussion? What are we?
Keep asking those good questions, as I would say. Keep asking those good questions. I mean, come to the committee meetings or contact your council representatives and the mayor. Let your friends know.
That's my concern.
Yeah, I do understand that, and I'm not trying to minimize your statement. I just want, we're all here to hear good questions and have those questions answered. So, all right, last one.
All right.
Quick, it better be quick.
Two things. One is, I think everybody's a little reluctant because what you're doing is you're opening up a third leg of the government entity. We all have to fill out paperwork. We have to expose ourselves even to one more governmental agency. Nobody wants to do that. The other thing with the lack of affordable housing in Lakewood, maybe you could work with landlords. There might be a small contingent of landlords out there who would be willing to, on a case-by-case basis, work with some people who are lower income without having to open up that third leg. Right? I've taken care of an elderly woman for many years, and she was kind of like a grandmother to us, but we gave her well below market rent to help her live in a unit. I gotta believe there's people out there that would be willing to help out.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. I don't think we're going to be able to get to a question on that, but thanks very much. Thanks to all of you. I'm not asking that anyone up here stay up here, but if any of you wish to have anyone answer any questions and they're willing to, you're welcome to come up. Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much for another good seminar. Appreciate it.